René Descartes, Discourse on Method, a radical guide to clear thinking, doubt, and self-discovery. What can you really know for certain? That question, more than any other, sits at the heart of modern philosophy, and Discourse on the Method is where it begins to take shape. First published in 1637, this groundbreaking work was written not by a dusty academic, but by a man determined to rebuild knowledge from the ground up using nothing but reason. It's not a textbook, it's a personal account, clear, focused and radical for its time, of how to think independently in a world full of confusion, disagreement and illusion. Descartes wrote for an audience like you, people curious about truth, sceptical of dogma and unsatisfied with easy answers. He believed that real knowledge couldn't be passed down unquestioned. It had to be earned, tested and rebuilt step by step. His approach led to a new philosophical method of approaching science, ethics and everyday life. In this blink, you'll learn how Descartes questioned everything he'd been taught, why he believed reason was the one tool shared equally by all, and how he set out to use that reason to reshape human understanding. You'll hear how he came to his famous conclusion, "I think, therefore I am," and why he thought the human mind was fundamentally distinct from the body. It all begins with a surprising idea, that the problem isn't how much reason we have, but how we use it. The limits of traditional education. Most people believe they're naturally good at reasoning, and in a sense, they're right. The capacity to judge and distinguish truth from error is shared equally by all, but where people differ is in how they use that ability. Having a strong mind doesn't help much if it's applied carelessly. Even the most intelligent can go wildly off course, while slower thinkers might get further simply by staying on the right path. What matters isn't brilliance, but method. Formal education promises clarity, but Descartes found it delivered uncertainty. After years in one of Europe's top schools, studying everything from philosophy to theology, he saw how often learning produced disagreement instead of knowledge. He admired subjects like mathematics for their precision, but was disappointed to see how rarely that clarity existed elsewhere. Most disciplines, he realized, were built on weak foundations, elegant in theory, but fragile in practice. Still, he didn't dismiss learning altogether. He valued literature, history, and even poetry for the ways they shaped thought. But he also noticed that reading ancient texts and studying foreign customs could make people wiser, or more confused if not reflected on carefully. Impressive-sounding ideas often lack real-world consequences, and when thinking happens in isolation, it can drift further from truth than the instincts of someone making everyday decisions. That realization led him to turn away from inherited knowledge and focus on observing life directly. He travelled, met people from different cultures, and paid close attention to how they thought and acted. Over time, he began to question anything he had accepted simply out of habit or tradition, and when he found contradiction and uncertainty in both books and everyday life, he concluded that the only reliable path forward was to examine his own thinking and begin again. That decision, to seek clarity not in other people's systems but in his own reason, became the foundation for the method he would soon begin to build. Building a new foundation for thought. Reaching reliable knowledge takes more than intelligence, it takes structure. Descartes came to believe that many of the beliefs people hold are shaped less by reason and more by habit, upbringing and cultural custom. It's not that people lack good sense, but that their thinking gets built on unstable foundations. Over time, the mix of influences from parents, teachers and tradition creates something more like a patchwork than a well-designed system. No wonder so many educated people reach different conclusions from the same facts. Descartes compares this to cities built up slowly over time, where irregular streets and mismatched buildings show the signs of countless adjustments. In contrast, a single planner working from a clean slate can design something more coherent. The same, he argues, should apply to thought. Rather than building on top of uncertain beliefs, it's better to start fresh. You don't need to tear down society or try to reform others. You should rather re-examine your own ideas privately and carefully. To do that, Descartes resolved to clear out every belief he had once accepted without proof, and keep only what could stand up to reason. But he also knew this couldn't be done recklessly. Like someone walking in the dark, he planned to move slowly, testing every step. He dismissed traditional logic for being too formal and obscure, and instead proposed a simple but powerful 4-part method for thinking. Accept only what is clearly true. Break problems into parts. Move from simple to complex, and review everything carefully. Using this method, he trained his mind by applying it first to mathematics, focusing not on numbers or figures but on general relationships and structure. This way, he strengthened his reasoning, developed a taste for clarity, and prepared himself to tackle deeper questions. But before he could move on to those, he had to do something harder. Unlearn his earlier beliefs and build new ones slowly, using only what reason could support. That set the stage for his most famous act of doubt, and the foundation for everything that followed. How to live while suspending judgment. Dismantling your beliefs is one thing. Knowing how to live in the meantime is another. Descartes understood that before rebuilding his thinking from the ground up, he needed a way to navigate everyday life without falling into indecision. So he created a kind of moral safety net, a temporary set of principles to live by while his deeper convictions remained under examination. The first principle was to follow the laws and customs of his country, and to act according to the most moderate and widely accepted opinions of the people around him. Since he had chosen to doubt his old beliefs, it made more sense to trust practical consensus than to act on untested theories. When trying to determine what people really believed, he gave more weight to what they did than to what they said, knowing that speech and belief often don't match. The second principle was to act firmly and decisively, even when certainty was out of reach. Just as a traveller lost in the woods should pick a direction and stick to it, he argued that action often requires commitment even when truth is uncertain. This approach helped him avoid regret, since he would base his decisions on consistent reasoning about what seemed most reasonable at the time. Finally, the third temporary principle was to focus on controlling his own thoughts and desires rather than trying to change the world. When something was beyond his control, he trained himself to see it as irrelevant to his happiness. Over time, this led to a kind of inner freedom, a habit of contentment grounded in understanding what is and what isn't up to us. With these 3 principles as a guide, Descartes resolved to dedicate himself entirely to using and developing his reason. This included rejecting beliefs he couldn't justify, refining his judgment, and slowly applying his method to real problems. As he travelled through Europe, observing others and reflecting on their customs, he continued clearing away old errors and deepening his thinking. Through this process, he was carefully creating the space to think independently. Certainty begins with doubt. To find something truly reliable, Descartes decided to begin by doubting everything. He questioned the senses, which can deceive. He rejected even mathematical reasoning, knowing that humans are capable of error. He went as far as imagining that all his experiences, including his own body, might be nothing more than dreams. But in the middle of this complete uncertainty, one thing stood out: the fact that he was thinking, and from that he reached a conclusion that no doubt could shake. I think, therefore I am. This became his foundation. The act of thinking proved that something existed. Not the body, but the thinking self. He understood that the mind was independent of the physical world and that the essence of who we are lies in thought, not in matter. From there, he proposed a simple but powerful rule. Anything the mind can perceive clearly and distinctly should be considered true. But that rule only works if the mind itself can be trusted, and for that he needed to understand where it came from. He noticed within himself the idea of a being far more perfect than he was, something infinite, all-knowing and eternal. That idea, he reasoned, could not have come from a limited, imperfect mind like his own. It must have been placed in him by a being that actually possessed those qualities. God And if such a being existed, then deception was not part of its nature. That meant the mind's clear and distinct ideas weren't tricks. They were the most reliable guide we have. This reasoning justified his method while also resolving a deeper fear that all knowledge might be a dream. Without a trustworthy God, even clear thoughts could be false. But with that foundation in place, he could now rely not on the senses or the imagination, but on reason as the path to truth. A mechanical world and a mind beyond it. Once Descartes had established a foundation for knowledge, he began applying his method to the natural world. What he found was surprising. Using only the idea of a perfect God and the laws of nature that must follow from that perfection, he believed it was possible to explain the physical universe through clear reasoning and mechanical principles. He imagined what would happen if God created a new world from chaos, governed only by those laws, and allowed nature to organize itself. From that thought experiment, he developed a model for how stars, planets, oceans, mountains, weather, and even living matter might emerge through orderly physical processes. He describes how light travels through space, how the Earth could form without being designed in detail, and how heat and motion could explain the behavior of fire, metals, and liquids. But the most striking part of this vision is his treatment of living bodies. He proposes that the human body, like those of animals, could be understood as a kind of machine, operating through heat, pressure, and circulation. Using detailed knowledge of anatomy, he describes the motion of the heart and the circulation of blood, supporting the idea that life's basic functions depend on physical laws. Still, he made a sharp distinction between bodies and minds. No machine, he argued, no matter how complex, could speak meaningfully or respond with understanding. Nor could animals, which may act skillfully but show no signs of reasoning. For him, the ability to use language and adapt universally, not just instinctively, revealed the presence of a rational soul. Unlike matter, that soul could not be explained by physics, nor reduced to biology. It had to be created separately, and it was not bound to the body's fate. That, he concluded, was what made humans unique, and what pointed to the soul's independence and immortality. Why Descartes chose not to publish more. As his work deepened, Descartes faced a decision: whether or not to publish the principles of his physics and the scientific ideas he had developed from his method. He believed these ideas had real potential, not just for solving theoretical problems, but for transforming medicine, technology, and daily life. He imagined a future in which understanding the natural world could make humans healthier, more capable, and less vulnerable to suffering. Yet he also feared that publishing prematurely would create confusion or conflict. In a world where authorities could suppress ideas and where debate often obscured more than it revealed, he wasn't sure the benefits outweighed the risks. Part of his concern was practical. Once an idea is public, others can misrepresent it, misuse it, or build upon it without understanding its foundations. Descartes knew from experience how easily ideas could be distorted, even by well-meaning readers, and he didn't want to be credited with a philosophy that wasn't truly his. He had no interest in academic fame or controversy. What mattered to him was progress, careful, cumulative, shared progress built on tested truths. For that to happen, people would need to follow the method for themselves, not copy conclusions they hadn't earned. Still, he understood that some openness was necessary. He didn't want to be misunderstood or forgotten, so he resolved to share selected parts of his thinking, enough to show what was possible, but not so much that it would distract from his own ongoing work. He asked for readers to examine what he offered, test it, and if they saw value in it, continue the effort. But he would stay focused on the long path ahead, using the time he had left to pursue knowledge that could serve medicine and human well-being. For him, that was the best use of a life: quiet, rigorous, and grounded in the hope that others would one day go further. The main takeaway of this blink to Discourse on Method by René Descartes is that true knowledge begins with radical self-examination, not just of what we know, but of how we know it. Descartes challenges us to strip away assumptions, inherited beliefs, and the illusions of certainty in order to build a more reliable foundation grounded in reason. His method is about cultivating intellectual discipline, moral clarity, and a mindset capable of navigating a confusing world. In this way, he invites you to question boldly, think independently, and pursue truth with humility and rigour. Okay, that's it for this Blink. We hope you enjoyed it. If you can, please take the time to leave us a rating. We always appreciate your feedback. And we'll see you in the next Blink.